Oh, this is gonna be crazy. That was great. Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of SpraynPray1000's Verdict, a review series starring me, SpraynPray1000, as I review some of the new games that I've recently played on my channel in playthroughs. So, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Resident Evil Revelations HD, which is a port, an HD port to be more specific, of Resident Evil Revelations, a game that was released for the 3DS console around February of 2012. And basically, this game is, as the name suggests, an HD port that has been made for the consoles, and I think the PC, although I'm not too sure about that. So, I'm pretty sure that the majority of this review is going to come down to how well does this game compare, you know, for a console game as a port, being that it's a port from, you know, a handheld console. Alright, so let's jump right down to business very quickly. Let's talk about the story. The story of this game pretty much starts out as Jill Valentine, who is a classic Resident Evil character, and her new partner, Parker, whatever his last name is, I have no clue, as they receive coordinates for where Jill's old partner, Chris Redfield, is supposedly lost on board a ship. And, you know, they get on the ship, and they pretty much find out that things aren't what they seem. In fact, the story spans a whole different, four different like time zones and 4 different scenarios of what's happening. You jump between Chris at one point. Chris is a playable character. Then Parker becomes playable in his own right at some segments in the game. And Jill is, you know, pretty much the main character. And then to round it all off, they have 2 new characters, one of whom you play as Keith. The other one is his partner is Quint. And the game introduces a bunch of different characters, to supply the story with different people that, you know, the characters all interact with together. And pretty much, I have to say that the story of this game was actually remarkably well done. I like it. I can respect it. Considering Resident Evil has kind of been suffering on several fronts, this game's story was actually probably one of the best Resident Evil storylines I've played in quite some time. To add to that, the atmosphere of the game, they really tried to bring back, for the most part, the horror aspect of Resident Evil. So not a lot of, there's not as many explosions and everything. Everything feels a little bit more, at least for some segments, when you're on the ship, and it's just everything's like a nightmare happening all over again. It brings back memories of some of the earlier Resident Evil games. The monsters are eerily disfigured, and they just tried to review that whole sense and bring it back into this game, which kind of adds to the flavor of this game. The soundtrack is definitely pretty decent. It's very good. It helps add to said atmosphere. So for the most part, the story, I don't want to talk too much about it because it was actually really, really good. The story of this game is pretty good, so I can respect that. Now, having basically talked about all the good stuff I like about this game in about 4 minutes, it's time to jump into the slaughterfest that is the gameplay review. And unfortunately, this happens to be the biggest part of the game. And that's also good. Something else happened. Now, the gameplay of this game is pretty similar to a lot of the older Resident Evil titles. It's not older. You're allowed to move while running. In fact, actually, this might be the first Resident Evil game where they let you do it. Where you can strafe while shooting, which usually when you play Resident Evil, they had just graduated off of tank controls and allowed you to, move around pretty freely, but they still rooted you in place whenever you wanted to shoot. Well, now in this game, they removed that restriction, something that was also followed by Raccoon City, Operation Raccoon City, and then later Resident Evil 6. You're free to strafe, you're free to move around while shooting, And for the most part, movement in this game is kind of weird, kind of interesting. Largely because of the fact that, again, this game was made for the 3DS. It's not, it doesn't have as many commands or as many new advances and such that the console games would have if the game was specifically made for consoles. So a lot of times this game, unfortunately, kind of still feels like I'm playing it off of the 3DS, to the point that it actually kind of becomes a hindrance to the gameplay. So for example, there's a dodging system in this game that helps you get out the way of enemy attacks. It's very, very awkward and weird, okay? And I'll explain. A lot of times when the way the dodging system works is right before an enemy attack, you push forward or you push back an A, as though you're doing the 180 quick turn that was introduced in Resident Evil 3 or 4, I believe. And you'll dodge out the way of the attack, and you'll be able to slip past the enemy and, keep fighting them. Well, a lot of times it just blatantly doesn't come out. Sometimes it'll come out and you'll still get hit. Other times, you'll just get hit. Sometimes you won't even be trying to do it, and it'll just happen, and it won't really help you that much. So the dodge system is very random. And in fact, a lot of times I wasn't even pushing forward. I was pushing to the side or pushing diagonally, and it would just come out, and it would just be like, well, that certainly doesn't help when I am pushing forward and that doesn't come out. So I feel that personally could have been something that was better, would have worked better, were bound to a button, if there was some reworking with that. But that's not even the biggest issue of this game, okay? One of the big issues I have with this game is the fact that the AI partner that you have with you, depending on who you're playing as, is not viewed as a target by the enemies, and at least not a very, very high priority target. So for example, you'll be in a fight with like a bunch of tough enemies, and they'll completely ignore your partner in lieu of you. So you'll be running around, you'll be shooting these enemies who could potentially have high damage output and maybe even an instant kill attack. They'll just push by your partner just to get at you and completely ignore you, and you're just kind of, that's not a fair way to split up the aggro. If you only one person is an acquirable target by 90% of the enemies, then that's not fair at all. On top of that, you're also accompanied by an AI partner for the majority of the game, and while there is no co-op in this game, and I mean, yeah, it is kind of Surgster's and our fault that we didn't research that, so he didn't waste his money. If you're going to be accompanied by an AI partner for the majority of the game who does no damage to enemies, really, and is not acquirable as a target, I don't see why co-op could not have been put in this game. Maybe for the 3DS version, maybe there's a lot of stuff that need to be hashed out with that. But they've done co-op before on Resident Evil games, so it's not like, this is something that they definitely could not have done for the Xbox version. And I feel that, considering the current status of the Resident Evil franchise, where it's in danger of being rebooted, and, we don't, all this stuff could potentially happen to Resident Evil, like, again, this is something that could only have helped the franchise, something that, at this point, the Resident Evil franchise is kind of ailing, and they're having problems trying to, they're debating whether or not they want to reboot it, whether or not what they want to do with the franchise at this point. And all I have to say is stuff like this with poor AI, monsters and bosses that just take too many bullets to kill, that just does not help the case of this game. It turns this game into a really annoying chore. In fact, there's a lot of points that on normal difficulty, I was completely out of ammo during boss fights, which brings me back to my whole point of Resident Evil 6 when the exact same thing would happen, where they would be giving you money and all this other stuff instead of ammo, which you actually need to beat the game. Well, here they just don't give you anything. Monsters don't drop anything for you to pick up. All this stuff has to be acquired from the environment, and to be completely truthful, there isn't enough of it, or what little bit there isn't enough to, help you get by, and it doesn't do enough. It's not efficient. So ultimately, the gameplay department is lacking on several fronts. In fact, another major point that it's lacking on is the chapter length. The chapter duration is just way too low. Like, for example, some chapters take literally under 10 minutes. They're like major parts of of each episode. The game is split up into 12 episodes. Some of these chapters have no combat. They're short. They're relatively simplistic, and they just basically play themselves. On top of that, I mean, what I did like about a lot of the parts of the game is that for the most part you're allowed to free roam around the Queen Zenobia, which is the main ship of the game. But on the other hand, there's really no reason to go to the point to go anywhere other than the place where you're actually going. In fact, a lot of times I would revisit areas that were off the beaten path, and I would find nothing new there. There would be no reason to go there. It's just basically linear in an open world environment. Well, a semi-open world environment. And yeah, there would be no point to even bother going there. On top of that, when we talk about the weapons of this game, as you know, there's like 4 or so playable characters in this game, people you switch between. Well, I mean, it is kind of known that Jill's campaign, or the main focus of the game is on Jill. Here's the problem I have with that, though. Jill... Okay, I thought someone was going to come in. The only person whose weapons you can actually upgrade and do anything with are Jill's, okay? You can't do anything with Jill's without with the other people's weapons. So for example, you'll be playing as Parker, you'll be playing as Chris, and you will not be able to put any attachments on your weapons. You won't be able to switch out the basic loadout that you're given, and it's not very efficient for the kind of ammo that for the amount of enemies you face and a little bit of ammo that you have. So I don't know what they were thinking with this game. It's very, very weird. And to be completely truthful, I'm not that impressed with this game gameplay-wise. Now, story-wise, I'm pretty impressed, you know, all these other things, but let's face it, the main meat of the game is the gameplay, and the gameplay is very subpar. Now, don't get me wrong, this game is probably one of the better games out there currently for the 3DS, but that's just it. It's, you know, this is the kind of quality I would expect from a handheld game, and, you know, pushing the limits of such stuff like that. Now, what makes it even worse is, as we know, the 3DS is capable of 3D. I don't believe this game has an option at all for 3D TVs to use 3D. So this version is, in a sense, kind of inferior to the presentation of the 3DS version, and it cost more money. At this point, Resident Evil Revelations for the 3DS probably cost $20. So for you to spend $50 on this game, it's kind of really a waste. It's like, what is the major part of this game? What's so different about the Xbox port that would be so worth the price tag? To be truth be told, there really isn't one. There's no, as far as I am aware, to my knowledge, there really doesn't seem to be any special, you know, to die for feature, or any really unique feature to this version of the game at all. It just feels like, you know, hashed out, and they just said, well, we could just port this over to the Xbox, and we know people who didn't buy 3DSs are going to play it, and yeah, that's just basically what we're going to do, and that's how we're going to market this game. We're not going to, you know, change anything up, or, you know, mix it up, or try to add something interesting to this game. It just felt like, you know, okay, it's time to go through the motions, let's pump out a Resident Evil game and let's move on. So I'm not impressed with this game. I have to say that this is very disappointing, to the point that it's like, well, if this is what Resident Evil's come to, you know, you're just going to keep making games in the vein of Resident Evil 6, then, you know, just forget it. Just at this point, I'm indifferent on rebooting the franchise. So, you know what? At this point, whatever happens is just whatever happens to Resident Evil. I don't know what they're going to really do with it. Both Surgster and I are not very impressed with this game. Ironically, we would have probably been more impressed if it was on the 3DS for obvious reasons, because it would, you know, that we don't really expect the same kind of caliber we can get out of an Xbox or a PS3 game. And even then, you know, this game still has problems. Like, for example, there's bosses in this game that fucking are just gigantic ammo dumps, and they just don't die. There's not enough ammo to actually kill these gigantic monsters. Even if you take advantage of all the different environmental effects and all this other stuff. In fact, even during some of the other boss fights, they have infinitely regenerating enemies. So, and, you know, if you have infinitely regenerating enemies that are constantly getting in your face that require ammo to kill them, you're going to run out of ammo with which to kill the boss, which is actually what you're going to need to do in order to get out of there and, you know, continue with the game. So there's some trouble spots in this game, but other than that, the difficulty curve isn't that ridiculous. It's just playing the game itself doesn't really, it's not that great. Like, this game is kind of just, you know, wishy-washy, and to be completely truthful, again, I'm not impressed with it. I think that, you know, a lot could have been done better. There's some stuff that they definitely could have changed up about it, but Unfortunately, what would I give Resident Evil Revelations HD? I would probably give it a 70 out of 100, just because of the fact that it's not that great. It's probably one of the lesser games I'm going to play this year, and you know, in terms of all the other stuff that's coming out, this is definitely not even something that I'm really going to even look back on. Not impressive other than the story. The gameplay is just abysmal, and if at some points it feels like a grind, at other points it's just a gigantic annoyance, and it's just not really something that's that fun to play. So unfortunately, Capcom, I don't think this was a good job on your part. I think that you took what was a decent game for the 3DS and you turned it into just a generic game for the consoles with no added ports or bonuses. Because let's face it, a lot of times when they port games and they re-release them on different consoles, like what they did with Resident Evil 4 numerous times and a lot of these other consoles, they add like bonus features to the game. They add other interesting stuff to the game, you know? They, like when Resident Evil 4 came out for the GameCube, it only had 2 game modes, which was the main game and Assignment Ada, which is more like a mini game. And then I think it also had the Mercenaries maybe, although I'm not too sure about that. Then when it came out for PS2, they gave it Separate Ways, which was an own campaign featuring Ada Wong instead of, you know, Leon. So you had 2 main campaigns and then Assignment Ada. They added a whole bunch of other stuff, and it's just, you know, I feel like I've been severely let down. Nothing that interesting, really worth playing. So unfortunately, not much meat here, you know, in order to juxtapose this with BioShock Infinite, which had plenty of meat, plenty of stuff to work with. This game really doesn't have that kind of luxury, and it's unfortunate. So better luck next time, Capcom, and I'll see you guys for the next review, which will probably be Fuse. So thanks for watching. Oh! That was funny. He just flexes for as long as you hold the button. Slap the shit out of her. Nope, not me, buddy. Oh, Falcon punch!